everyone. Welcome to this new episode of Carolyn Talks. This is the podcast / YouTube channel where I, your host, Carolyn Hines, film critic and journalist, talk to film creators around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today I am joined by filmmaker Patricia Bbaale Bandak to talk about her film Death of a Saint, which is, I think, a very unique experimental documentary because it's exploring your mother's life. Your mother died when you were 2 years old, and your family moved to Denmark as a result after her death. And you, as an adult and as a mother and as a expecting mother, because you were pregnant at the time, I realized, I was wondering, like, is she pregnant? And it was like you were trying to discover who your mother is, not only for you but for your children, especially for your young daughter, Imelda, who was named after your mom. And I thought this film was very interesting with the way you filmed it. Like, it's not filmed in a very straightforward manner. It's filmed almost like it's filmed in first person, then in third person, but also almost like found footage. So I'm really excited to talk to Patricia about the way she makes this film and the discoveries that she makes about her mother. And I think also about yourself along the way. But first of all, thank you so much for joining me, Patricia.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So the first thing I have to ask you about this film. So when the film opens, you're with your brothers and you're walking through the birch forest in Denmark where you and your family lived. And the way you opened the film, I thought was interesting. The first line you said is, "I don't have to speak to you in Danish or English." And I thought that was interesting because my first thought was like, but why doesn't she also include you Uganda, which is the language of Uganda? I was like, how come you didn't say I don't have to speak to you in Danish or English or the language of your motherland? And I was thinking, but your mom wouldn't know Danish anyway. So like, but I know it's a weird question, but I wanted to ask you about that because I think it really spoke to how you were also trying to figure out your identity. You know, like, what is my identity as relation to my mom?
I think it's a very interesting question, but I think it's part of the struggle that I also kind of explore, like identity wise. I didn't include Luganda, my native tongue, because my language is just not as full. I wouldn't be able to really express myself. Like, I can speak with my family, I can go by, but I can't really formulate sentences as deep as I can in Danish or English, unfortunately. So it's not like but it's also a subject that I touch upon in the film later on. So that's why.
Yeah, because the film is you do it in the way that you're speaking to your mom, as though this is a letter, it's a visual letter to your mom, and you're writing it to her, and you're like saying, how should I speak to you? Like, what do I speak to you in? And like you said just now, you answered it in the film, because there's a line. I'm gonna talk about a lot of things, but I think there's a line, there's something you say this is a lady that you met later on in the film, and it ties in, I think, to the first question that you asked in the beginning of the film, like, how do I speak to you, where you said, I don't know my mother's tongue. And I thought it was interesting that you said that, because in the film we see you speaking to your family, your dad's family, and then eventually your mom's family in Uganda, and yet you switch back and forth in English. And I think that's very typical for a lot of people in different countries in Africa, where a lot of African people are polyglots, you know, because so many of the countries, they have your native tongue, but then you have the tongue of the colonialist settlers, whether it be Danish or Dutch or French or German, or, you know. But I thought it was interesting where that line that you said, I don't speak my mother's tongue. And I kind of saw it as not necessarily only not being able to speak Luganda the way you said, where with as much depth you want, but I kind of saw it as like, you don't know your mom and you don't know how to speak to her as a person, you know. So like, the mother tongue isn't necessarily the language itself, it's the way you communicate with people. So talk to me about making the film about being a letter to your mom, you know, a letter. I think it's a letter to her, but I think it's a letter to yourself as well, where you're saying, I don't really know who I am as my mom's daughter and who I am as my dad's daughter, but I don't know who I am as my mom's daughter.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered a little bit, because I think like in writing her a letter, I realized that I was also writing it for myself and to myself, and also my daughter, Imelda. And I wanted to write a letter because I wanted it to be like a communication to someone. I wanted her to, I know this might sound silly, but I kind of wanted her to show her my life
Mm.
and what I was doing and what I wanted to include her in the search for her, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It
Um,
does.
yeah. So in that process, it's kind of like I kept saying like, because my mother's name was Imelda and my daughter's name is Imelda, and it's like a circle, and it's like mother, daughter, mother, daughter. And so the letter is like from a daughter to a mother, but I have also since become a mother myself, and it's also to my daughter. So that circle kind of, yeah, it never stops, and
Mm.
it's just it changes. Like my position changes, and that's kind of, yeah, what I was trying to do with the letter.
And could you tell me, like, what was why you decided to make a documentary film about this? Because the film, I think this is a story, like, there's some people who would write a memoir about something like this, or maybe even write a fictional drama, but you decided to make it a documentary, and you utilize very different film styles throughout the film. Like, it's not visually predictable, where it starts one way, which is almost like a found footage where you and your brother's in the forest. I'm like, if I didn't know this was a documentary, I would think this was a potential horror film, because I'm like, why are these people walking in this forest? But then you use like a lot of different styles. Like, there's some where it's in black and white, and then it's like filmed almost with like infrared, and then there's some that looks like stock footage, and like they use so many different film styles to talk about that, because I thought it was really interesting.
I wanted it to be very tactile, like so. Like, why were we in the forest? Like, I've grown up in Denmark, so I'm integrated by now. Danes, they go for walks, so it's kind of like a commentary on Danish culture. They go for
Mm.
walks all the time, and like in a Danish context, like I don't see a lot of like African Danish families walking around in the forest. So for me, it was kind of like, how do I bring my like how do I portray me as an immigrant in a way that's also just like, it's like it's a puzzle, like all these different things, like the forest, the DV cam, the camcorder thing, that's another puzzle. Like I also wanted it to be like almost like a diary.
Mhm.
That's why I also recorded a lot of it myself. Like I wanted that feeling of the audience being close to me, and to kind of show like not just talk about my feelings but also show them. And yeah, I didn't write a book because I make films. Like I wouldn't even know how to write a book. So this for me was the most natural way of portraying this.
Mm.
And it is a lot of different medias, but it's also like a lot of different emotions. And I wanted to touch upon like how do you talk about trauma and generational trauma, the PTSD? How do you talk about murder, and humor and motherhood? Like there's so many aspects, and I also wanted, and so many themes, and I kind of wanted like the visual language to reflect that as well.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to um the way how you look at life, where you look at life. Life is different possibilities, right? You see life different ways, and when you're speaking to different people, you speak to them differently. Like, the way you speak to your aunts isn't the same way you speak to your dad, and the way you speak to your dad isn't the same way you speak to your brothers, and it's not the same way you speak to your daughter Imelda. So like, when you're in the film, it's like you're showing like how you see the world and how you communicate with the different people in your lives, because you need to utilize different I think that's a skill for all of us. Like, we have to learn how to utilize different communication skills with all the people in our lives. And as a filmmaker, you're utilizing all the different ways that you see the world and you interpret it in the story. And I think also with regards to like your emotions perhaps at the time during this particular moments that you're filming, like some of the scenes where you're filming yourself, like you're under the bed covers filming, like and like it looks like infrared, like you're using the infrared light, and like everything is very close up, you know, like there's scenes where like your pupils are blown wide because the light is on the focus, and you're like, as the audience, we can't help but focus on your eyes, you know, and like really look at you, and there's nothing else to distract us. And then there's other scenes, like I think one of the ones that kind of reminded me of Bigfoot, where you're with your daughter, in Uganda, and you're telling her, this is your land, you know, this is your homeland. But at the opening, it's like very fuzzy and grainy, and it kind of reminded me of Bigfoot footage, you know, like where you can't see it in the distance, but it's just like this grainy texture. And I just thought that you use so many different ways to tell the audience, this is how I see the world, this is how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah, and I also think like when you're part of the diaspora, it's also like you do have, like, I have multiple cultures in me and multiple languages and, you know, different way of seeing life and seeing the world. Like it's not just like, I think it's a part of like, both my visual language, but also just how I interact
and I
how
think
I
that's
am in the world.
important. And I think it's important because it's unpredictable, you know, like, and I think that's important as a filmmaker, where the audience is never sure where the story is going to lead or where you're going to show us next. And there's also another, I think there's some really important lines I should say, things said by you and your family, but there is something that you said that I thought was really profound in the beginning. You're in the forest with your brothers, and it's nighttime, and you're all talking about your intention with the film and what you want to do, and you say, I put it in here in my notes. You said, I don't want to tell her the details, but I don't want to lie to her, meaning Imelda. You know, you're like, you don't want to go into all the details about everything that happens with your mom, but you were doing it in part so that when she does ask you questions, you don't have to lie, you know. And so talk to me about that, and about how that's I think the most important thing that was driving you for this film, because you're doing it for yourself, but you're also doing it for Imelda, you know, so that you have answers for her when she asks you questions.
Can you just repeat the question? Like, are you asking me like why I'm not just telling her everything? Like what?
No. So talk to me about having that mindset as a filmmaker, and but also as a daughter, because you're doing this film, yes, as the daughter of your own mom, Imelda, but you're also making a film to tell a story for your own daughter, where you're like, you're not going to give her all of the like broad details unless she asks you specifically, so that when she does ask you, you have answers for her, you know, because I got the sense that because you grew up not knowing, that created so much stress for you. You don't want her to have that stress of not knowing herself, you know, so that you have answers for her.
Like she was my primarily like motivation for making the film. And in the beginning I was like, I'm just doing it for her. And then slowly I realized I was also doing it for myself. But in a way it was just easier to think of it as a mission that I had to do for her. And I feel like she like what I also realized, like making this film, like it's been many years, is that she doesn't have this trauma, you know, like, but when you grow up in an environment where there's so much what do you call it, secrecy and confusion, and you know, for a long time I was so afraid of her inheriting that I didn't realize, like, in the first place this was never her trauma. And I wanted her to be like able to just be a free child and happy, and for me and her to have a bond where we can talk about these sort of things, where she knows that she can ask me questions and she can, you know, she can always come to me. And for us to have that, I needed these answers. But as I just told you, you know, slowly, of course, I realized that I'm the one who's traumatized. So these answers were actually from, they are for me for first and foremost. And when I deal with these traumas, I can be more free, and that can give her more freedom as a child. I don't know if this makes any sense. Like I'm also like translating these things in my head. Um, but yeah, does it make sense?
No, it makes sense because even if she doesn't ask you things necessarily about your own mother, if there's things about you yourself that she wants to know, you will have answers for her, but also you'll know how to answer her and how to speak to her about it. Because the thing is like there's this thing, and it's so funny. So many of the interviews that I've been doing recently have been about mother and daughter relationships. And a lot of them are talking about how mothers keep secrets from their daughters, and that puts strains on their relationships, and whether it's said or not, like the daughters do know they're like, my mom is keeping something from me, and this is creating a block between us, like the relationship can only go so far because the daughters feel like they can't communicate with their mothers, and they can't trust their mothers, and they can't tell their mothers their secrets. And I think your film is kind of like that, where in like your mother isn't keeping secrets from you because she's not there, but their family members who are keeping secrets from you. Your dad is keeping secrets from you. And when you go to Uganda, the aunts and the uncles and the friends, they don't want to be specific because in the culture they're saying when someone has passed on, you don't say anything bad about them. And it's like you're not asking them to say anything bad. You just want to know her. You just want to know who she was as a person. Was she funny? Was she argumentative? Did she like to argue? Did she like to do debates? Like, you want to know, was she a trickster? Like, you want to know all of these things, but because of the cultural differences, but also because I think they themselves didn't want to delve into like their own memories of her. They're creating like a disconnect for you, and you're like, but you're telling them, but I want to know. I need to know for me so that I have so that my identity becomes more solid. And I relate to that a lot because I'm from the Caribbean, I'm from Barbados, and like our culture is kind of the same way, where the older generation, they don't really speak to the younger generations and tell us things about the past. There's things my grandmother has passed on, but there's things my grandmother, I would ask my grandmother would do or say something, and I'd answer her a question about it, and she would lock down. She wouldn't say anything. And it's kind of the same with my mom. Like, I try to talk to my mom about things, but then she kind of shut down and locked down too. And it's like, and so like, and so when I was watching the film, I related a lot to your frustration, and like you're laughing and you're joking, but like you're still very like under the surface. I could sense the frustration in you where you're just like, tell me something. Like, I just want to know.
But it's also, I wanted to like break that circle, so that I don't have to repeat that way of being, towards my own daughter. Like, it doesn't have to be like that. We can have like a different type of relationship. But it's also like understanding my dad and my aunts, my family, that of course it doesn't come from a bad place. It comes from, wanting to protect me and my siblings. But it's also this thing of, I think in the Ugandan culture, like I will always be the child. No matter how old I get, I will always be the child. So I think it's been difficult for my dad to kind of like stop viewing me as a child and, just talk to me. Yeah, so I really feel like that they also were on a journey where they had to rethink how they talk to their children and grown children. And yeah.
Yeah. And I noticed there was also a difference in when you were with your dad and you were seeing the family there. I noticed one side of the family was a bit more closed off than the other side. When you met your mom's sisters, I found they were more open, they were more receptive, and they were more willing to speak about her, and like, like say, oh yeah, no, she was funny, and like saying those kind of things. Whereas, so I thought it was like interesting that the two sides of the families, when you went, like the energy in the film is very different. I could sense there was a difference in the energy.
But I also think it's like, okay, it was her sisters, and maybe you can talk to your siblings in a different way. And I think that my dad's side of the family is just like trying to be really, really respectful, and kind of like honor her memory. And I think like with her sisters, it's just kind of like for them, maybe it was also just nice remembering her and remembering that she was annoying and that she was, um, I wouldn't say lazy, but that she really didn't like housework, for example, all those stuff. Like they don't consider it bad because it's
Mhm.
just who she was.
Yeah.
And I think maybe like with siblings, there's a bigger freedom, in how you can remember someone who has passed away and how you talk about them. Where my dad's family has just been really, really, really respectful.
And do
Yeah.
you think, and because the film is called Death of a Saint, before I started watching the film, I was like, where's the saint coming from? But then I watched the film and I honestly, because I think it's a call back to Ugandan culture, which is very I got the sense it's very conservative, especially Christian conservative, Catholic conservative, Anglican too, because I was like, there was a picture of, I'm like, that looks like an Anglican priest role, because like Anglicanism is like fairly big in Barbados as well. My aunt was
Yeah.
Anglican, but like again, you were talking about the especially the dad side of the family, where they were like, she was a saint, and one of the ladies does say like, oh no, she was perfect, and they were like saying she was almost saintly, like she could do no wrong, and like she was this perfect woman. And I wanted to ask you about the title of the film, and about having this perception of your mom being presented to you as her being almost like a saint, like the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect person,
Yeah.
and how that really shaped the way you saw her, or how it made you kind of maybe reevaluate the film a bit.
I think like that was what's been bothering me for all these years,
Mm-hmm.
that she was this saint figure, and it was so like it's difficult to mourn a kind of like a plastic figure. Like she didn't feel human. She was, like the way they describe her, it's like she's like God. She's so perfect. So she never felt real. And I realized like when someone doesn't really, when they don't really feel real, it's more difficult to mourn them, because she was always like, I grew up with this image of her being a saint and an angel, and it just made her feel more out of reach when you're not perfect and, an angel and, whatever. And so with the title, it was like, yeah, it was both like, for me, it was double, it was death of a saint, like literally my mom, like her death, but also death to that image, death to that facade.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because she's a human being, she was a
Of
mother,
course, yeah.
she had her faults and her foibles, and and I think in doing that, in like real coming to that realization, I think it's important because it takes pressure off of you to try to live up to any uh, perceived idea you would have had of her, or the expectation that people would have, because of course, this is just my perception as someone who watched the
Yeah.
film, but I got the sense also that you were struggling with living up to the ideal of being the perfect daughter, of the
Yeah,
perfect mother,
exactly.
and because she died when you were only 2 years old, you never really got to be around her for a significant amount of time. You only
Mhm.
have what other people tell you about her to go off
Yeah.
of. So I could only imagine that could like mess with you and like make you think, oh my gosh, I need to be the perfect daughter, because you'd be like, I need to live up to this idea of the perfect mom, and
Yeah.
then as a mother yourself, you'll be thinking, but wait, would my own mother do this? If I do this, would my mom approve? That kind of stuff. So like it was important to kind of like disabuse yourself of the perception that she was perfect, because like no one is
Yeah.
perfect.
No, and it was a huge pressure growing up, feeling that, you have to live up to
Mm.
this saint image. And also just feeling so not like a saint, you're kind of like, where do you go with that? When you have a family that puts so much pressure on you, and you have, they used to like emphasize on like, well, this is also like the Ugandan humor, all the stuff that she wouldn't approve of.
Mm.
They were like, hey, your mom is in heaven, she's looking at you. Oh, she wouldn't approve of that. And and maybe all these innocent things, they say them and they maybe laugh, and maybe it's just like, but it kind of sticks with you
Mm-hmm.
because, when you're alone, you're like, but oh my God, maybe she wouldn't be proud of me. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just, So I feel like the dismantling of the saint was an important journey, and I wanted her to become human.
Mm-hmm.
And when she became a human, it's been easier to mourn her. Not that I haven't been, but it's just more, I don't know how to explain it, more concrete in a way now.
Yeah, no, I get it. Because grief is, I think grief is a continuous process,
Yeah,
and then and in making the film, you're learning how to grieve her in a new way than
exactly.
before. And I wanted to ask you about your brother. So I was kind of shocked at the posted, and when your dad announced, like when your dad was like, okay, yeah, I had 9 children and I had to leave. I was like, 9. So, but I wanted to ask, and you're the only girl, but I wanted to ask you, like, what was it like during the process of making this film, the conversations you had with your brothers, because you're exploring this film from the perspective of a daughter, so like you only have that idea. But what was it like being like going from the beginning of the film, having all of these questions about her and like talking with them about the process of making the film, and then at the end, like having I guess the closure that you needed to like mourn her in a new way, but also to close the idea of her being a saint and a particular type of mother. And then you have them who spent more time with her. What was it like going that transition, like from the beginning of the film with your brothers to everything that happened at the end of the documentary, and you were like, okay, I'm finished now, I can go and talk to my brothers about this?
I think like it has been like it's been so many years, and it's been really difficult. And I think that it's like we share the same story, but the film is not, it's not their story. So some of my siblings, they wanted her to just rest in peace, and others also had questions. Like most of them were of course curious and also wanted, to know more. But it's also like, I just think that you mourn in different ways and you grieve in different ways, and we're so many, but the grief doesn't look the same.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it's bigger in me than in them, like it's just different. um but of course it's been really nice having all my siblings, and not all of them were in the film, but we've been talking about it, and some of my siblings who are not in the film, like, have also been very supportive, um and they are much older than me and could share like bits and pieces, but we were all children, so none of them really remembers her well.
Hmm.
um but like towards the end with my brothers, it was just like, it was like on one side it was really like a relief, and now I could finally just, oh, I could breathe. But it was also like, shit, how am I gonna tell them what I found out? Because it was some heavy stuff. It was really like, it hasn't been easy, and we are still talking about it. Like
Hmm.
it's really heavy information. So it's still an ongoing process. And closure wise, I'm not of course, like, I do feel like there's some type of closure. I feel that I understand my dad much more, and I understand his actions really. But oh, like the information that I got is also like, it's in my head.
Yeah.
I think about it a lot.
Yeah, because you're thinking, what do I do? Like you understood
Yeah.
the decisions he made, like leaving Uganda and
Yeah.
taking you and your brothers to to live overseas. But then you think you have to come to that one realization, but do I have to make the same choice? And then um you said understanding your father more. I think that's also another thing with the film. Like, while you're also trying to understand your mom more, you're trying to understand your dad more. You know,
Yeah.
you're trying to understand your own motivations, because something that you talk a lot about in the film is like having that disconnect from culture. You know, because like because you left there as a child, you never really got to be immersed in the culture. You know, you never really
Exactly.
got to like experience growing up in Uganda as a young girl, as a teenager, you know, having friends in Uganda, you know, forming like really close community bonds. And so there's, yes, the loss of your connection to your mother, but then there's loss of connection to the homeland and to the culture and to the people. And that's something that does affect you. I think mentally, that's a part of the trauma, right? Because you're moving, and you're moving because of a traumatic experience, and that will impact the way you see the country and you see everything. And in doing that, you also question your dad's motives. You're like, but you took me away from the only home that I knew, you know, and that you're, and then you're thinking, but why would you do this? You know, why would you deprive me of this? And then you realize why he did it, and you're like, okay, get it now. So the film is, I think, also very much about discovery of who your father is, you know, and like understanding his motivations too. So talk to me about your conversations with your dad. And I think him realizing that he needed that he needed it as much as you did, because he just as his family didn't really want to talk about it because they were trying to be as respectful for as possible, he had kind of like shut down part of himself in not talking about it. He was depriving himself of talking about this woman that he loved so much, that he had 9 children with. So talk to me about the conversations you had with your dad and realizing he needed this as much as you did.
I think like the conversations with my dad were the hardest ones, because you know, we didn't grow up talking about our feelings all the time, and this is, of course, like, it's traumatic for him, you know, watching your wife get shot and murdered like that is heavy. And I think that, like, also in regards to like my mom's family being very different than my dad's, I feel like with my dad and all of us, we suffered from PTSD, but we didn't know it. You know, like my dad didn't go to therapy when my mom was murdered. None of us ever really received that type of help. So I also knew, like, talking to him, like, what would I trigger? What would I, you know, I wanted to be gentle, but I also had all these questions. So, and I was afraid of him shutting me down, or, you know, not really wanting to participate. But then I realized that he really did, and he wanted to talk to me as much as I wanted to talk to him. And it was really like moving for me to see him like that, and also realizing that, okay, he also still has some stuff that he needed to look at, you know. But I think for him, like, I think that he had maybe some sort of closure. At least, like, that's what I felt like with my mom and her sisters. Like my mom's sisters, that they were happier than we are because they had closure and they had each other. They could bury their sister and they could talk about her, and, you know, all the good things and the bad things. And for us, like, we never talked about her growing up. And I think that just enhanced the trauma, you know, like not mentioning her, not talking about her. So yeah, so I just feel like now, like, talking with my dad, it opened up, you know, my side of the family. So hopefully we can have it like my mom's side.
Has your dad seen the film?
Not yet. I
Not
want to
yet.
be there.
Any of
Yeah.
your brothers have any of your brothers seen it?
Yes, my siblings have all my siblings have seen it.
And what do they think? What do they think?
No, except no, two of them, they haven't seen it yet.
Oh.
Some of them, they just like, they didn't want to see it for the, like, I had like a Danish premiere, and they didn't want to see it with other people, which is fair. And my dad is in Uganda, and I want to be there with him so we can watch it together. So I'm
And
gonna go to Uganda at one point and have a screening for my family there.
I think that would be, I think that's a good idea. And I think it's important to watch it with him in Uganda. Because,
Yeah,
because not only because it's set in Uganda, but so much of everything that starts the purpose of the film happens in Uganda, like
yeah,
that's where so much um using the term undiscovered ground is left, like so
yeah,
much things that still need to be talked about, and then be like, I know, free. I think it'll be important to talk about those kind of things on home turf, because like for me, sometimes when I go home back to Barbados, because I live in Toronto now,
yeah,
I like, you miss home so much, and like there's some things you feel like you can talk about better at home.
yeah,
It just,
exactly.
because the ground, like there's just something, there's a connection to
Mhm.
home, to the homeland, that
Yeah,
I think is healing, and you need that aspect of healing for sure, I think.
yeah,
Yeah, and
definitely.
you, and something you mentioned a couple of times, that you said it took years. Like, how long did it take you to make this film?
Oh, like I knew I wanted to make it as soon as I became pregnant with
Mm,
my daughter, and she's 10 now. Um, but I like started working on it for like in 2018.
mm.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's yeah,
and through the pandemic too, because there are scenes where people are wearing
yeah,
like the face, the mask and everything.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, because I started before the pandemic, and then
Mm.
it was on a hold for a while, a year, or can't even remember how long the pandemic kind of, yeah, maybe a year and a half. And yeah, so it's been a while, but it's okay. And I'm also really happy that it's done.
Yeah, because that's like almost like a chapter of your life. You can say, you know what, I did this, I set out to do it, and I did it, and I can close this chapter in a sense of the making of it, where like you can now start to process things as they occur to you over time, because the film makes us so long. Imagine there are things that aren't in the film that happen years, and you can like look back on and think about it and say, you know what, this is something that I
Yeah.
perhaps need to think about and talk about with my family and my dad, and even
Yeah.
with your daughter Imelda, because you took her to Uganda, and like there's things that would have happened that she may not have understood then, but like but now that she's older, she'd be like, wait, can you like talk about this particular thing that happened and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, when she gets older, we'll watch it together. Like for now, she's still a bit too young. Like I feel like some of the information is kind of heavy, and
Yeah.
I think I'm just gonna wait a little bit. But definitely it's also just like being able to kind of just like what we talked about, mourn and grieve and process everything, get the help that I need, realizing that I had PTSD, because you grow up thinking, like for me, checking if there's someone there ready to kill me. I'm like, I guess everybody does that. And then I talked to a therapist, and she was like, no, no, Patricia, no, not everybody are afraid of getting murdered all the time. And so I think like the film also, because my siblings and I, we just grew up like this, and we kind of normalized, um, we normalized so many things. And also because we use humor as a defense mechanism in my family. So we laugh a lot. And looking at us and my siblings and myself, people wouldn't think, oh, these people, they suffer from PTSD, because we laugh and we're loud and we are many. So making this film has made me realize, okay, some of these things are not normal, but I can also do something about it. And that's also, a thing I wanted to do with this film, like normalize talking about death and trauma and what it does to a family.
Yeah, and I think it's important because it shows people PTSD presents in different ways. It's not all one thing. Like, in like watching like a lot of North American films and TVs, they present PTSD as people who are erratic, and always fearful and thing. But I'm like, no, PTSD is kind of a latent, almost like a latent symptom where like you become hypervigilant, like that's a sign of PTSD, being having weird imaginings of, like you were saying, like thinking that someone is always out to kill you, and like that's a form of PTSD, like not being afraid to talk about things is a sign of PTSD, like being afraid to talk about something difficult or traumatic experience. That's it. Like it presents in different ways, and I think there's something you do. I know we're gonna wrap it up, but there's something that I was wondering what I was like, what is she doing? Where you were like, I need to go and talk to killers, and like at first I was like, girl, what? I'm like, how did you get going from talking to your ex to like talking to like convicted killers in prison? But but then, and I as you were talking and it went on, I was like, okay, you know what, this is gonna make sense, because you're trying to understand the motivations of people who would do something like that. You're like, because you're looking for a reason. You're like, but why? What did my mom do that would make someone want to do this? And so you go and talk to convicted killers, and but to me it kind of made sense, because it's the same thing as like a psychologist who studies human behavior has to talk to people who do these things to get a full understanding of what human behavior is like, what motivates someone to do this. Like you can't talk to the people who took your mom away, but you can talk to people who took someone else away from their family,
Exactly.
and have some kind of understanding of, I think, human behavior as well. And yeah, so I thought it was interesting. So talk to me about that decision, because I felt like it felt almost like the film was taking a left turn, but then it was like, what, no, this fits in perfectly with everything that you're talking about.
But I think like my producer and many from the team, like they never really understood it. But from the beginning, I knew I was going to talk with convicted killers, and for a long time, I thought that it would, be a part of the film. Like at some point, I thought, oh, maybe it's gonna be like a conversation between me and killers. But then I also felt like, no, I don't want to give them that much attention either. But it is what you said, like I wanted to understand human behavior. I wanted to talk to someone who have killed. I wanted to, like, do they feel remorse? Did they think about like the repercussions, and not just like for them, but like for the future generations? And I it's still like I like, before I knew a lot of the stuff that I found out in the film, I was like, okay, if I had a chance to talk to them, to the people who killed my mom, I would want to talk to them. And I, you know, also just being curious. Did they just continue on with their lives? Did they have children? Are they normal? you know? And I still have those thoughts, and like it's not even like a revengeful thing. It's more like I feel like it's unfair if their children are normal. It sounds really weird, but I feel like why did they get to have like a normal functioning family, and love, and people being whole and whatever. So I was just really, really curious, and still am. And yeah, this part is something that I might, look more into in the future. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, no, it does make sense, because it's like when you have a court trial, like we're part of a court trial with like in the sentencing, there is normal to have like victims' family. You call it the victim impact statement, where the victim's family or friends and family gets to confront the perpetrator and tell them, this is what you did to me, this is what you did to my family, this is a hurt and harm you caused. Like you don't get to walk away and live your life without knowing what you've done, without knowing the consequences. And while you may not have been able to, unfortunately, not have the opportunity to do it to the people who took your mom away, you got to confront people who did it, who did it in a sense. And if I'm not like saying like you're speaking for the actual victims themselves, but you're also reminding these people like your actions have consequences, and like this is like, you need to know. And even if someone didn't tell you, I as a victim, I as a family of a victim can tell you this is what you've done. And I think also as a filmmaker, it makes sense because filmmakers, especially as a documentarian, like you're supposed to have, I think, a general wide understanding of human behavior. Like you can't make films about humans without understanding human behavior in general. You can't, it can't only be from your perspective, you know, you have to be able to tell it from other people's perspective and have a broader understanding of why we as humans do the things we do, including all of the terrible things we do. So it makes sense that you do. And I think it's important too, because in talking about grief, you need to understand what caused the grief. You know, like grief doesn't exist in a vacuum. You need to understand the actions that led to the grieving process.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I thought so. So yeah, so even while I was watching the film, I may have thought, like, you know what? But then it's like, you know what? No, that makes sense. I'm like,
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm happy that it made sense in the end for other than just me.
No, it did. And I think for you, like when your dad watched, I think his reaction might be kind of interesting as well. Because did he know that you did that, or did you tell him you were going to do it before you did it, or afterwards?
I told him.
And what was his reaction?
My dad is he's very calm and collected. He was just like, okay, why? I'm like, I just really need to talk to these people, and I think he understands like the psychology of it. So yeah, like throughout it all, he's been very supportive, and yeah. But now, like, I can't wait to show the film in a place where that's not like Danish or Ugandan. Like, I've been very curious as to like how do other people react to it. Also, because there's 3 different languages, and do people understand when I switch from Danish to Luganda? Like yeah. So I'm very excited to like for like yeah, like how other people see it, like who are not Danes. And
are you going to see it are you going to be here in Toronto for the screening? The reason I did the Zoom interview because I wasn't sure if I would be here because I might be traveling, so that's why I'm doing the Zoom interview. But so like you'll be here in Toronto for it?
Yeah, I'll be here. I'll be there. Yeah,
I think you'll get good reactions because the thing about Toronto is it's a very multicultural and also very multilingual city. So like people are accustomed to having like hearing conversations with people in different languages. So but what was interesting to me, like because I like hearing different languages and like hearing people speak. The thing that kept occurring to my mind is that I was like, Danish sounds a bit French. And I was like, I've heard Danish before, but hearing it spoken in the film juxtaposed next to Uganda, I was like, oh, okay. Like you can hear like the similarities in the different languages. And it was like, Danish sounds a bit French. But so I just thought it was interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, thank you so much for taking the time for speaking to me, Patricia, and congrats on making the film. And I think what you did was very brave. Like you confronted a painful part of your history and your family history, and you're like, you know what, I'm not gonna run away from this anymore. I'm going to confront it, and I'm going to do it on my own terms in my own way. So congrats on like doing that. And I think that's a very important thing. And just that in and of itself, I think will be very inspiring to your Imelda, in particular to your daughter.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me for this talk. It was really nice. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you.